Alright, how did I use 3D printing to create Byte 90? Let's get into it. The primary CAD software I use is Plasticity. It's super simple to use and is marketed as CAD for creatives. Now, 3D printing generally has this reputation of being a low quality product. And in my opinion, it's really thanks to people like this who, try to sell you a low quality product, right? Looking at this is clearly a bad quality print. And unfortunately, consumers will associate this to 3D printing. Now, the thing about 3D printing is that you have to understand the constraints. It's slow, and not every design will work with your 3D printer. So, with this, you really have to balance time with quality, right? The more time you put into your 3D prints, the better the quality you get, but it drops the profit margin on your 3D printed parts. But as I mentioned, your design also has to be optimized towards your 3D printer. So how you model it and how you position it in the slicer will ultimately play into the quality of the output. So when I'm modeling something, I always think about the position of how it's going to be printed. That's not an afterthought. And keeping this in mind, you have to optimize your prints to avoid overhangs, right? There's a lot of tips and tricks that you would do in 3D printing. So for example, if this area was at 90 degrees like this, it makes it very hard to print without supports. And by avoiding supports, you save a lot of time as well as material. And you could do this by just simply, rotating any 90-degree surface into a 45-degree angle. Now, obviously, sometimes you will need support no matter what, but in the areas that you do need support, you could reduce that area of support if you can. So you will notice that throughout my design, any area that has a potential overhang will have a 45-degree angle. And this will help me avoid supports in general, right? And it reduces the time to print. And this is generally how I would approach optimizing my designs with 3D printing. And this is really, the key concept of balancing out time with quality when it comes to FDM printing. It almost turns into a design language for your 3D printing designs. Now, as I mentioned, the way you position your 3D models in the slicer plays a big role. Like you would think to print this upright, but when you position it like this, you might get a better quality in certain aspect, but then you have this huge overhang area, which takes actually a lot longer, more materials, and in the end, the quality isn't going to be as good. So the way I position my design is I position it the way I design it to be printed. And based on the optimizations I did to my design, you could see that, effectively there's no overhang. And even when there is some overhang, I've already reduced that area to the smallest amount of overhang as possible. The next biggest factor in time versus quality is layer lines. Everyone hates layer lines, but I feel like a lot of people are really impatient in terms of trying to reduce the layer line. They will try everything but print at a smaller layer height. So for instance, I found that printing at a 0.12 millimeter with a 0.4 millimeter nozzle really gave me the best result. So at an hour and 40 minutes, it's considered pretty fast in my opinion. However, if you were to increase the layer height to say at 0.24, you could drastically reduce the time it takes to print this model. And this takes around like an hour, right? However, the layer lines are more visible in this aspect. So filament brands also play a big role in terms of quality. And not every brand will give you the same output, right? So based on the brand, you will get more of a consistent 3D print. Now, another thing I like to do is turning on ironing for flat surfaces, right? And this will give your flat surface a really smooth and, glossy like quality in your print. Now, not everyone likes to do this because it does significantly increase the time of your print. But if you care about quality, it does give a good user impression. Now, unfortunately for like translucent or clear 3D printing, you won't get anything close to resin printing like this. But you could get pretty close. You won't be able to get clear, but as for translucent, you could get it with the proper tweaks and setting in your slicer. However, the downside to FDM printing is that you will effectively see those layer lines, especially on translucent surfaces. It's more apparent. Speaking about layer lines, the material and color you use to print will effectively determine on how visible those layer lines are. And as you can see here on darker colors, especially with matte POA, you won't be able to even see those layer lines. Whereas on a bright color, you will definitely see it. So by understanding 3D printing constraints and how you could optimize your 3D model, you will ultimately get better quality out of your 3D prints. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. See you guys in the next one.